Today I'm going to show you guys the importance of recycling your diagrams and how that could help you guys in the later questions when you guys are working through your logic games. So if you guys can search this up, I just have to pull up LSAT. If we could turn to the LSAT prep test from June 2007 and go to questions 11 to 17, that would be awesome. So the game type should be the cruise line. Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to jump into this. So first of all, this game is basic linear. So we're just ordering things as we can tell based on the conditions. And we are given several conditions here. So we're basically told that there's going to be 7 different voyages, right? And then 4 different destinations. So we know that there's going to be a repeat of some sorts based on the conditions that are given to us. So I've already gone ahead and mapped them out over here for you guys. And I have a piece of paper that I will show you guys with the conditions. And basically I'll explain kind of my reasoning and what's going on here. So I'm sorry, this is like really like chicken scratch over here, but I don't know if you guys can see that over here. There's like a grid, right? And so basically what this grid does in terms of ordering is it allows you for each question to kind of map out your answer choice. And this is different from your stereotypical dashes that you guys would have, because this allows you to have a cohesive diagram on the side of your page that will allow you to continue with the diagrams below. So you can start looking back and referencing the ones from questions 13, 14, 15, and so on, right? So when you guys are mapping conditions, one tip that I have for this particular game is really going back and referencing your conditions to check, a regular ordering games. So if something asks you for what is acceptable in terms of a schedule, or asks you for the layout of one particular set of an acceptable group, you would basically, I don't recommend mapping every single possibility out. That's going to be a waste of time. What I would recommend is going through your conditions, taking the first one and going through, okay, so we know that J cannot be in week 4, so do any of those conditions or answer choices violate that? And so looking through the answer choices, we can see that D already violates that particular structure, so we can rule that out. If we continue down and we check for the second condition to see if anything violates, Trinidad week 7, we can see that E does that. And so then we can eliminate that, for example. So you see, when you go through these answer choices, it's important to break things down and go through, yes, I will show my diagram again, and go through those conditions, of course. So I'm just going to leave this up over here. So basically, just to explain this, as you go through the answer choices, what you would do is if you ever have like a could be, question type, you would basically plot these diagrams over here and you would constantly work down with them to find an acceptable diagram. And so what else can I say here about this? For could be true questions, one really big thing to note that I think could help as well is not looking for what must be true, so something that works all the time, but looking for an answer choice that can potentially work. So all it has to do is prove that at least once or twice that it is possible. And so you would basically be looking for things that you can rule out that cannot be true, for example. So a good example of this is question 13, which asks you if Trinidad is in week 5, then which of the following could be true? We could start looking at the answer choices that we have to try and rule out what is possible and what isn't. So we know that based on Trinidad being in week 5, for example, that Trinidad cannot be in week 4 or week 6, that J cannot be in week 4 as well, and so on. So with this particular question set, what you would do is you would start mapping out the conditions as you feel fit to see if something would work, and then you would keep those. So I've had a couple questions like in the Facebook group chat, and I think in other classes as well from other students, asking if they should erase their answer choices or their diagrams if they feel like they got something wrong. And one really big tip that I say is really important is to always keep your diagrams and to, again, map things in a way that is cohesive and that is going to help you refer back to things. Because once you go to a question like number 17 over here, with the diagram that's created from all of the other answer choices of what could be true, you can start ruling out things that you know can be false based on your false diagram. So you would cross that out. And it's a very easy way to see, even if you mess up, never erase your answer choices. And yeah, And another really big thing in terms of this game too, and in games in general, is just really understanding to go back to those rules and keep referencing them. That's going to help you with time. So I'm seeing a question here that says, are you saying for could be trues plus conditional stem questions, you check roles inferences immediately before diagramming, similar to an orientation question? So what I recommend in terms of starting this process of could be true is finding out when you're diagramming what the rules are telling you. So if you have, for example, a conditional game, I don't think this game really does have any, except for I think G and J. So G always has to come before anything for J. So that's a conditional, I believe. But otherwise, I don't think that there's much there. But basically what you would do for those rules is you would go through, you know, what cannot be true, for example, in a diagram. So if J can't be on 4, or if you found a particular inference, for example, J can also not be on 1 because G has to be before J. So then you would diagram that in there, and then you would have a cohesive set that you can work through to rule out other answer choices. So yes, I do recommend that you pick the rules first, draw out those inferences, and then start mapping them and filling things in once you feel very set with what can't be in certain areas, what must be in certain spots. And yeah, because otherwise I feel like it'll take a lot of time. But that's pretty much all I have for this game in terms of structure. But yes, and Judy says on the side that yes, always good to check if any past work rolls out or helps eliminate answer choices. Yeah, so perfect. Thanks, guys, for giving me the floor. If you guys have any questions, please let me know.
That was fantastic, Jasmine. Thank you so much for that, really emphasizing the importance of using previous work. I think folks who have watched my video explanations will know that I do things a little bit differently stylistically. I tend to draw diagrams separately. But regardless of whether you draw them separately and individually, or you do the grid system that, Jasmine, that you showed, either way, I think using previous work is the key there, and maximizing reuse of that. When I talk about ways to get faster at logic games, there's maximizing upfront inferences and then also reusing previous hypothetical scenarios. And so you always want to save those. You never want to erase them. Sometimes they can eliminate an answer choice in a question. Other times they may solve the question outright and let you eliminate everything, or let you see the correct answer at a glance. Really useful. And I see some questions for you, Jasmine, so I'll give it back to you.
Sure. So Rosetta is asking, would you say drawing several diagrams from the start of all possibilities based on the rules would help? Or, okay, so drawing it on all possibilities can sometimes not be as efficient as you would like it to be. If it's something where you feel there isn't much room, for example, in certain grouping games that you see or ordering games, you're given certain conditions that you know, you only have 2 diagrams really to draw out, right? Because if certain conditions happen where, for example, you're given 4 different spaces and there's a condition that looks like, you know, there's 2 M's and something has to be in between, well, then there's only 2 places that M and M can go, right? So that would be an example of where you can map out certain things, and that would work perfectly fine. But for this particular game, because there are so many different sets, we're dealing with, you know, 7 here, but I've seen games that deal with 9, for example. And so that's going to be very difficult to diagram all of the possibilities, and that could take up a lot of the time when it's more efficient to look at what the rules are saying. So my main you know, suggestion, just keep looking at those rules and refer back to them as much as possible. You know, draw the diagram out at first. So what you do is, here, I'll show you. So you'd have the 5 sections over here, and they would basically look like this. So when you start off, you see that? So it'd look like that when you're first starting out. So at least you would have the diagram ready because you know exactly what the game is, which is ordering. In the case where I think someone's asking about grouping as well, so grouping and ordering, diagramming grouping games, how does grouping games differ? So it really depends again, because are we talking about an in and out grouping game? Or are we talking about a splitting one? Could you clarify? Because that also has its own discrepancy that I could definitely clarify for you. I just need to know which one you're talking about. For question 13, would you ever draw 2 diagrams, one with J and one? Yeah, exactly. That's actually what I did. Because if you see in the top over here, I'll just kind of block everything else. I know it looks bad. But you could see that actually does help you out, and you can map that because you know that that's the only 2 places that that can go, and you can actually allow things to fall into place. With grouping matching games, I'm just trying to remember what that looks like. It's a little bit different because you'll potentially have times where you know, for example, you're given like 6 different people and 3 different days, but sometimes the grouping matching game will deal with you having a certain set of time. So 3 days or 3 people present at, you know, that one day, for example, but sometimes they give you an unconditional amount. So you're given like 6 different people, but you don't know how many people are going per day. There may be a minimum, but you don't know necessarily. And so for that, you know, diagramming all of that out could be, you know, might not be as efficient, right? So you want to make sure that you're looking at the rules again and seeing based on what you are given, if there's any inferences you can make. So you're going to be relying a lot on those inferences and what can't be at certain places. For each diagram choice, it's kind of like when you're given a logic game, you're given like a snowflake almost, where it's very unique. If you're able to identify it, you can create the correct diagram. But at the same time, with the LSAT, there's only a limited amount of logic game, you know, diagrams that you can't create because there's only a certain amount of, you know, variety that can happen, right? Even though the numbers or the letters may change, you know, the diagrams look very similar. So with a linear or a logical ordering game, I recommend the grid. You guys can just do the regular, like, you know, the repeating once kind of thing, the line. But in terms of the other stuff, as you were talking about with matching, that doesn't always work. And in the case of drawing a grid diagram, I don't think that would be efficient. I think that, and I'm going to go through each type that I have currently, this would be something that I would use, for example, in like a grouping splitting game or a grouping matching game, I believe. So again, like it's because like, you know, you're only given a certain amount of dates that would just work more efficiently. For a grouping in and out game, you usually have something that looks like this, and you may have another diagram that would also help you try to like map that out as well. But also there's another one that is about conditionals where it says a lot of ifs and thens, and that would look a lot like the spider principle over here. That basically would help you map out which groups would be in, which groups would be out. And I usually find that spider game where it deals with a lot of conditionals happens a lot in the in and out games. So if you see a lot of ifs and thens, it's kind of worth trying to combine all of those different logic conditions together to create some diagram that you can use to choose what conditions require what triggers what, and what doesn't, right? Another thing that I find with spider diagramming, for example, is that not to confuse a necessary condition, so a sufficient condition with a necessary one, right? Sometimes the inverses don't always work depending on what the game is stating for you. So for example, a necessary condition does not automatically trigger a sufficient one. So if something is requiring another thing, then that sufficient condition is always going to trigger that other condition, the necessary one, from happening. But sometimes that doesn't always work the opposite way around, if that makes sense. So that's where a lot of the mix-ups go. But other than that, that's usually the typical game structures that I use to map out my stuff. If you guys have any more questions, please let me know. Hopefully this provided some kind of clarification. Like the only time I say like with combining those, it would only really work for, I think, an ordering game in the sense. For example, with like the chart that allows you to see a cohesive thing. But what I would do for like in and out games, for example, is something completely different where I'll have different charts, right? And then I'll have something filled in. But the one thing that I would have at the bottom, especially if I know that there are conditional indicators, is one roadmap, which is the spider diagram at the bottom over here. So if one thing, so this in this particular case, A, so if A happens, then that means that B and D also happen. And if B happens, then C happens too, right? So that is kind of mapping all those conditions together. And sometimes, and I see this especially in and out games, that can help you give a roadmap on the top. So when you're doing all of the different charts for the could be true questions and the must be trues, you have something at the top that can say, okay, listen, when I have A, that means that I have to have these other 3 variables in there too. So then you can start eliminating, for example, with questions that ask you for a minimum or a maximum amount of numbers or people in a group, that you can start eliminating certain groups or variables based on the chart that you've created. And that would be your cohesive structure you would use. If that's not the case, for example, in a grouping matching or grouping the one with the diagram with the 3 stuff, I don't know. You would basically just be looking at the conditions and drawing your inferences. That would help you the most. I think those ones are the ones where I struggle the most with trying to find a maximum number or a minimum, but there's still like that cohesive amount of inferences that you can still use and just referencing all of the other charts on one particular page. Hopefully that makes sense.
Fantastic again, Jasmine. Thanks so much for sharing your approach and your experience. I think it's really cool to see how different folks diagram games. And I do a lot of things similar to you. I do some things differently, but different things work for different people. So it requires a bit of experimentation, but I love the general principles underlying everything you shared. So thank you for that.